Welcome to Future View, a FINEx Innovation and Excellence Summit production. I'm your host, Steve Roosevelt, Chief Learning Officer at CFO.University. Joining us today from the beautiful state of North Carolina is Gary Kokens. Gary is a world-renowned expert in the enterprise and corporate performance management space and founder of analytics-based performance management. Gary's background, an engineering degree from Cornell, an MBA from Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, and his career pursuits give him a unique perspective on the role finance and finance leaders play in enterprise performance management. Today, we're following up on the FINEx talk Gary gave at the FINEx Summit last September on analytics-based EPM. Welcome, Gary. It is great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Steve, for inviting me back.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I mean, you have such a great, such a storied background in a space that we all need so much help in. And so it's just wonderful to have you willing to kind of update us on your FINEx 2021 talk with this future view. So I really appreciate that. Let's jump right in. I'll start with a question that has to do with, last fall, you described these 8 forces that are forcing, CFOs to implement EPM and CPM methods. Help us out breaking down the top 4 of those forces.
Well, just to clarify, EPM, CPM are acronyms, so they stand for Enterprise Performance Management and Corporate Performance Management, and they're synonymous. Yeah, of the 8 forces, I think the first one, the biggest force, I think, is the mistrust of the management accounting system for accuracy. Most managers don't trust the cost accounting system. And the real issue there has to do with allocations, overhead allocations. Most accountants, I say they get lazy. They allocate it like spreading butter across bread. And that's okay for complying with statutory external financial reporting. But, you really have to use activity-based costing principles to trace and assign based on cause and effect relationship to have more accurate product and standard service line costs. The second one is poor customer value management. Customers are the source of value creation for shareholders and owners in commercial companies. And most organizations don't really do a good job of measuring customer profitability. I'm talking about actually getting to a profit and loss statement for each customer. And so when that visibility is there, then they can help marketing and sales answer the questions: which type of customer is most attractive to retain, to grow, to win back and acquire? Which type's not? How much do we optimally spend, if you will, generating those? The third one, I think, is the executive frustration with strategy failure. And that force, which I think is getting more and more popular to use tools like the strategy map and the balanced scorecard. And there's a bunch of other, if you will, strategy deployment tools. That's really about aligning the behavior of the employee teams and managers with the strategy of the executive team. And by using these tools, not only can you communicate strategy to employees in a way that they can understand it, which most don't, but by using targets and KPIs, you basically rely on the incentive system of them to execute the strategy. And I'd say the fourth one is the poor budgeting. I always say the budgeting process is broken. It's out of date a couple of months after it's published. It's, caves into the loudest voice and strongest muscle to those veteran sandbaggers, know how to do that. And in that, what's happening there is a move more towards driver-based cause and effect relationships for budgeting, and actually replacing the budget with rolling financial forecasts, meaning refreshing the forecast quarterly, maybe even monthly. But to do that, you really do have to think like an engineer. You mentioned about my Cornell degree. I was a division controller when I was 27 in Milwaukee, but I like to say I'm an engineer masquerading, as an accountant. And the reason I bring up industrial engineering is to do the driver-based, really accounting predictions. You really have to classify the behavior of the resource capacity as sunk, fixed, step fixed, variable. You got to get the unit cost rates. I think it was engineering 101 freshman year, volume and mix times unit rate equals capacity required, number of and types of employees in their spend. So that's the top 4. I know I went through that a little bit long.
That was incredible. Just think about the things you just hit. So, people can go listen to your your FINEX talk from last year to learn about the other four. But think about, you're hitting financial statements, how close that is to accountants. So that's a problem. People don't trust them. You hit customer-based stuff. Well, customers are our lifeblood, like you said. You talked about strategy. Well, if we're not getting strategy right, then we got a big problem. And then, the budgeting and forecasting, another place that we live and certainly want to get better at. So, I mean, I think you named all these places where, big heartbreak if we don't get those right. And that kind of leads to my second question, which you give the finance and accounting industry a hard time because you're frustrated with the slow adoption rate of EPM and CPM. And so, I know I heard you say that. If I heard you say it once, I've heard you say it 100 times. So, how do we kind of go through the ROI? So one of the problems is we can't get to an ROI. It's too complex. Can you tell us how we can use, how we evaluate these from an ROI standpoint to get them in place?
Well, actually, I wish I could basically answer the question how to get the ROI, but I'm really going to give a different answer. At some point in time, you just have to go with faith. You have to, in fact, when people say, what's the ROI on activity-based costing? I say, well, I'll tell you that relative to, give me the ROI on the general ledger. There was a study done several years ago by a faculty member at University of Maryland, and she tried to look at the ROI. And what she discovered is that there were so many interactions of innovative techniques at that point in time, it was really hard to decipher which one was really leading to the ROI. So my belief is you really just have to have faith that implementing these CPM methods, and that's what they are, they're methods, and they're best integrated seamlessly like gears in a machine. You have to basically say, is this worth the effort? Will we be better off? So I'm basically sidestepping the question. I don't know how to calculate the ROI, but what I do know is that investment will have high yield return.
Well, I was talking to Andrew Codd the other day, and we were talking about kind of when you mentioned the general ledger, what's the ROI of the general ledger? Talked about, well, our question was, what's the value of audited financial statements? How do you put a value on that? We know what we pay for them. What's the value? And is the value, well, if I couldn't get funding because I didn't have the financial statements, does that put me out of business? So I kind of see where you're coming from. I probably, I think it's one of those questions that we can put out there and have people kind of continue to work on it. But I think you're right that, understanding, having an analytical mindset where, relying on analytics for our decision-making or helping us in that with the heuristic part of our business is really valuable. So, understanding that, believing that analytics are important to making decisions and knowing more and getting facts and being able to analyze that. I think that's a healthy step in saying, well, that's how we come up with our ROI. And it may be faith ROI rather than a hard number, but I think that's a lot of the cultural aspect that we're talking about in the ROI side. I know you get really excited about this next topic, and you talk about rapid prototyping and iterative remodeling as part of what the key to this whole the whole transformation would be to an EPM method. Help us out with that and describe that some more for us, would you?
Well, the problem that rapid prototyping, which I'll describe, solves is activity-based costing, an example, has a really bad reputation from the 1970s and 80s. The implementation of ABC was too complex of the models to become systems. They were unsustainable. No one could understand them, and they failed. And people say, oh, isn't ABC dead or ABC doesn't work? And I like to say, no, it's just full absorption costing done correctly. So I came up with the technique to implement ABC in 2 to 3 weeks, not 6 months. That was another issue, was taking so long. And then even sometimes halfway through the implementation, the CFO or the CEO just pulled the plug and said, it's another meaningless exercise from the bean counters. And briefly, what rapid prototyping starts off with is just 5 or 6 cross-functional employees in a room and building a high-level model in just a day. Its intent is not to produce any particular accurate information, but just to basically describe what it's going to look like. And then the morning of the next day, bring in the fellow line managers and some of the executives, maybe some board members. And there's a briefing. The 6 people show what they built. It's very engaging because it's their own company. Steve, the light bulbs go on with everybody. Oh, that's how we get rid of that butter spreading of overhead. Oh, that's how we can see our true profit margin layer like an onion skins. Oh, that's how we could do benchmarking. with apples, not apples and Oreos. And so they get buy-in. And so the afternoon of that second day, I then go around the room and say, all right, when this model is complete in 2 to 3 weeks, because we'll do just a couple more iterations, a little deeper, a little more accurate. I ask them, what will you do with it? Kind of like Field of Dreams movie, if they build it, then they come. So that's the technique. Same thing with strategy map and balanced scorecard. I can construct, actually, I like helping CPA firms and consultants do this. At this point, I like transferring knowledge so others can deliver this. And that one is really fun. That one, I just have the executives the night before fill out 10 yellow Post-its, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I think everybody's familiar with the SWOT analysis.
Yeah.
When they come in the room, I put the classic Kaplan and Norton 4 perspectives on the wall, left to right, learning and growth, the process to customer to financial. They put them on the wall. It takes them maybe 10 minutes. Then I ask them, go look at the other Post-its that the other people and move them that are similar. And by magic, within about a half hour, there's maybe 2 to 3 clusters of Post-its in each perspective. Voila. That's the strategic objectives in the strategy map. Next step, what would be a KPI that we could monitor the progress towards? So that's real quick. You do it fast. I call it 18 holes of golf on a polo horse. And then the iterations means do it now, take your time, take a couple of days, but the point is speed to results. I always have a sense of urgency. So you're not talking about 3 to 6 months. You get the results really quickly. And now act on the information. That's really you want to get to. Now that you see what you've not seen before, it's different than your belief system, take the actions. So that's rapid prototyping in a nutshell.
Wow. I mean, it's interesting. And the way you described it, how quickly, one of the questions I'd follow up with, what if people don't have a deep background in the costing side of things? Does that hold them up, or does that matter? Or can you go through it just as quick when they don't have a deep background?
Well, what's good is when you do this, at least with ABC, typically the 6 or 7 people in the room are not from accounting. They're like, they're in the departments. And usually engineers and process people, they get it. They actually understand costing better than the accountants, mainly because the accountants are so wed to closing the books and external statutory financial reporting. And that's okay for statutory, for reporting to regulatory agencies, investors, and so forth. We're talking about management accounting, which you don't have to follow the same generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, rules. So my point is, actually, operations people better understand costing sometimes than the accountants.
Well, I hope that what you just said raises the hair on the necks of accountants, because that's a big indictment. So and there's probably a lot of truth to it. But if and that helped, that kind of a message to get out from behind our desks, understand what's going on out there, and do the things that you just described. This rapid prototyping sounds really interesting. I definitely, we need to dig into that some more. We might not have time today, but certainly that's an area that I think is really exciting to have quick wins in this area.
Just briefly, if you think of a value spectrum from least important to most important, the least important of accounting is external statutory reporting. You got to do that for compliance. Then it gets more valuable when you do historic reporting, last month, last quarter, profitability analysis, and so forth. The highest value is when you go to the predictive view, which I talked about as the fourth, driver-based budgeting, rolling financial forecasts, what if scenario analysis, capital budgeting. Those are all decisions that impact the future. And that's where that capacity management, sunk, fixed, step, fixed, variable fits into place. And again, a lot of accountants, variable, fixed, it's outside their comfort zone. They just like, the statutory reporting.
Well, you're helping change that, by the way. I think a lot of your teaching is exactly that. And it might be a little bit of a punch in the gut for some of us, but I think it's really valuable. And taking that engineering approach and putting it out is really valuable. You work with a lot of different companies, and you have some that have been, very successful in implementing, EPM and CPM methods. Can you, share a few lessons from those successes with the audience?
I think the number one lesson learned implementing these is it's got nothing to do with technology. It's got nothing to do with processes. It's got nothing to do with software. It's all about people. And the real issue is resistance to change. It's human nature. People like the status quo. Only babies like change, their diapers. And some of the concerns that cause resistance is fear of others knowing the truth. Oh, you're going to get this more accurate. Oh, I'm going to discover I'm a product manager, that other guy's product or woman's product is more profitable than mine, but with the overhead spreading, mine's most profitable. Other obstacles, fear of being held accountable, fear of being measured. These things prevent people from basically wanting to get the buy-in. And then I'll say it, weak leadership, not every executive team's got the highest IQ. So the real lesson learned is you've got to think like a sociologist or psychologist. Organizational change management, behavior change management is a big, big deal. And I think people underestimate. You can have all the capabilities of building models and calculating and so forth, but you got to first overcome that resistance. And so that's, to me, the major lesson learned when people embark on the journey of implementing EPM and CPM methods.
People. And, I think how I interpret what you just said is identifying the phobias around this change. What are they? And you listed a bunch of them, but, we kind of have to be a psychologist to that and say, why are people going to resist? We have to know our people well enough to understand that and get in front of those phobias so we can fix them. That's a really a good point. And it's so funny. What isn't successful that doesn't have people in it? I mean, there's every success has people involved, doesn't it?
Well, you mentioned you almost have to be a psychologist, but the problem is most of the accountants, I call them what they are like, they're Newtonians, like Isaac Newton, the physicist. To them, the world's a big machine. Give me what levers, pulleys, dials. They really need to think like Darwin, Charles Darwin, Darwinian, sense and respond. The organization is an organism. And so you really need those behavioral change management skills.
Amazing, coming from an engineer who's got an accounting background, talking about that. That's fantastic. But I think you're right. That's a shift that we can make, call it the emotive side of the business, understanding that better. Fantastic. I wish we had more time because we could go on for hours on this, because what insight you have on for accounting and finance professionals on, how life is changing for us and how we can make it better. So, Gary, it's just been a pleasure, having you on the show today.
Thank you. If I could just slip in, and maybe there's not time, you can edit this out, but I just want to conclude on this. I think in the past, the best leaders and the best executives had the best answers. Today, I don't think that's the case. Today, I think the best leaders and best executives have the best questions. There's too much complexity. There's too much volatility. There's too much uncertainty for them to rely on their gut feel or intuition or the types of answers they had earlier in their career that got them promoted at the top. They need to really create a culture for investigation and discovery and embracing really analytics. So I'll conclude on that.
Well, that won't get edited out. That's definitely worth the extra couple minutes we're going over. So thank you again, Gary, for joining us today.
My privilege.
CFO.University is one of the proud organizers and hosts of the Finance Innovation and Excellence Summit, coming to you in midsummer, with the main event being held on September 7th and 8th. Learn more about FINEX 2022 at www.finexsummit.com. Until next time, enjoy, learn, engage.